Hi, it's Kaylee here. Today I'm going to talk about my birth story. Basically, on a few videos I kind of have referenced it already. There's a few that I plan to do where I figured, do you know what, I'm going to take these off because there's some glare. There's a few videos I plan on doing that might make a little bit more sense if people know kind of what went on. This is going to be a long video, I'm sorry. So I'm just going to put this out here now. If you're pregnant and you don't want to hear a horrible story, not that there's worse ones out there, don't get me wrong, but if you want to hear a nice, light, fluffy story about some woman who's had a dream birth, this isn't for you. So I'll start with towards the end of my pregnancy, and my bump was measuring quite big. I was really big when I was pregnant, and I retained plenty of weight afterwards. So when I went for my midwife appointments, they sent me for some extra scans just to check baby was okay. And it was a couple of weeks before I was due, and they said, look, he's gained 200 grams in 2 weeks and that's not enough. But then 1 week he's showing at normal size, then he's huge, then he's a little bit under, and they just couldn't seem to, I know he's inside and they can only take certain measurements, but they couldn't seem to gauge where he was at all. It'll get good, I promise. They couldn't seem to gauge his size anyway, so they were worried. They wanted to get him out so that they could see what was going on, because his size was not just growing, it was really fluctuating quite a lot. So they decided to induce me on my due date if I hadn't already gone into labour, which I didn't. So the way this works at our hospital, and I just want to put it out there, they did a really good job, and through any of this I don't have any complaints about what they did, but this was the process. They said, we will phone you when we're ready for you to come in, because it just depends what beds we're having. An induction isn't just like you pop in the morning. If you haven't heard anything by lunchtime, give us a call. Lunchtime came, I hadn't had a call, I rung them, they weren't ready. They said ring after 8. At this point I'm thinking, am I going to be induced today? I'm just sat around waiting. It went on for a while, to the point where I was like, do I eat my tea? Do I wait? I don't want to get a call. Then it got to 9 o'clock and I thought, they're not going to ring at 9 o'clock surely. Anyway, they called at midnight. Well, no, they called at 11:30 and I got to the hospital by midnight. So that's when I was induced. Midnight-ish on my due date. So I hadn't really slept because I kept waiting for this call. I was ready to get this baby out. I was huge. So when they called me, we went down. I'd had 2 hours sleep and I'd been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, just because I couldn't sleep, so I was pretty tired. Then they took me to be induced. They started by inserting a pessary. I had been having contractions for a while beforehand, but these were almost Braxton Hicks-ish, or so I thought, which I will get into. There was no rhyme or reason, but I kept having them. They weren't X amount of time apart or X amount of time. So they inserted this pessary, and when they inserted it, they said to me, you're really small and really tilted. And what I've learned is that I have a tilted womb. I didn't know that was such a thing, but that's what I've learned. And within an hour I was contracting a lot, and it was painful, but it still wasn't like every 20 minutes or every hour. So I started contracting. They were getting significantly more painful than the other ones, and my partner Dave was asleep in the chair next to me, and I remember they came around to monitor me. They hadn't been that bad. I maybe slept for like an hour or two, and then it was maybe 6 AM, maybe not quite, and they were really hurting, and I was pinching him like with my nails on his arm, pinching him, going wake up, and he wasn't waking up. Now I have quite a lot of anxiety, so I didn't want to make a lot of noise, because it's 6 in the morning, all these women have been being induced for ages and they want to get some sleep, and stupid me was anxious about annoying the other people on the ward. So I was there like pinching Dave with my nails, trying to wake him up. Eventually the nurses came round and I said, I'm really hurting, I'm really struggling. They said, you can't go to the labour ward until you're 3 centimetres dilated at least, and you can't have any painkillers heavier than paracetamol until then. Paracetamol? Oh no. No, this is not a paracetamol job. Now I handle pain really particularly well, whether or not they just couldn't tell. I was like, well, can you check me, because I'm in a lot of pain, and if that's what needs to happen, then check me. Oh, you're not due to be checked for an hour. because we check X amount of hours after inserting the pessary. I was like, but if I'm in a lot of pain and I want to be checked, can I not be checked? And she was really hesitant, and I get it, they were busy. These girls were busy. Like I say, the midwives were brilliant, and I get that they have a procedure, but please check me. Luckily, 10 minutes later, a student midwife came round, and she was the best midwife my entire stay there. She came round to give me my paracetamol, and I said, I'm really struggling. She went through all the breathing with me, really calmed me down, and said, let's get you checked. So they took me, she checked me, I was 3 centimetres dilated. Told you, don't want to wait an hour. I'm in labour. I'm not joking. Just because I'm like not having a fit on the floor like the woman over there does not mean this does not hurt. So they took me upstairs in a wheelchair. Probably could have walked, would have taken a lot longer, but I could have, and I'm very stubborn. So they took me upstairs, they wheeled me upstairs, contracting all through the hallways, and I was really embarrassed, and I don't know if I'll ever feel like that again because now I just don't give a shit. But at the time, because I'm quite an anxious person, I was a bit mortified. They took me into this room, I was really struggling, so they gave me some gas and air, and that helped a lot. I obviously at this point was taking pain relief, and it's all a bit hazy. Because they'd moved me into the ward as such, and I'd got a labour room, I was allowed to call my mum, so my mum could come down because she was my other birthing partner, and you can only have both of your birthing partners when you're considered in labour and you get onto a labour ward. So my mum came down, and honestly, ridiculously, even though I was only 3 centimetres, I was just like, don't go into real fast labour and my mum miss it, because I was petrified of my mum missing it stupidly. So she came down, they monitored me. I don't really remember the order that everything happened in after this. I know that they broke my waters and that it was excruciating for me. I took a lot of gas and air when they did it, and that's my advice. I wanted to try and go as long as possible without pain medication. Now, I was quite reasonable about this. I wanted to see how far I could go because I didn't want to take everything, then it get worse for me to have nothing else to take. That was my reasoning. I don't think there's any shame in taking pain relief, and I said before I went in, you know, if I agree to a needle, be it, you know, not an epidural, what's the other thing? Pethidine. If I agree to pethidine, it's got to be pretty bad. I did take pethidine. I really didn't want an epidural, and I really didn't want a C-section. Now, I didn't want the C-section because I didn't want the epidural. I'm not brilliant with needles, and I'm not good at sitting still when I'm supposed to. So I did not want the epidural. I would honestly have rather been put to sleep than have an epidural. So they broke my waters, and quite a lot. There's different ways of waters breaking. Some's like a trickle, it's continuous, some's like a big gush. Mine seems to do this weird in-between thing where I had a massive gush when they broke them, and it was immense, and then every time I moved I lost about what felt like a pint full. It probably wasn't. I had pethidine twice, so that's the injection in your leg, as well as taking gas and air for contractions. So I said earlier I had these random contractions. So my contractions were increasing in pain and frequency. However, they weren't every 20 minutes, they weren't every 10 minutes. My contractions all the way through my labour were completely irregular. They said it's rare, it has a name that I've forgotten, but it does happen where you can just contract kind of randomly. So I wonder if I was in there's like an early stage of labour that you can be in that isn't Braxton Hicks, that is labour but it's really slow. So I'm wondering if I was in some sort of slow labour for maybe a bit beforehand, who knows. But I'm glad I was induced, because if my real contractions had been erratic and I'd not been in a hospital, I would not have gone to a hospital, because I'd have been like, this isn't real labour. And I'd have been that idiot who had my baby on the toilet. I had pethidine twice. Now I laboured on, ooh, I hear my husband coming upstairs for bedtime. I laboured on for a while, and they checked my bloods or my something or others. Something was low in my blood count because I hadn't eaten since tea time the day before. I ate a little bit and I said I'm going to be sick. Well, I stood up to try and go to the bathroom to be sick, while she was trying to get me one of those little bowls to be sick in, and as I stood up, a load of fluid came out and sick came out of my nose and my mouth, and I was just stood there covered in blood and fluid. I carried on labouring. They gave me more pethidine. I fell asleep is the honest answer, so that's what I remember from my labour. I fell asleep because I was full of drugs, and the bits that I am awake, I kind of remember other people talking around me and me maybe saying things that I probably shouldn't have. So when I woke up, my contractions were different, but I watched all these videos and I didn't know what to expect. They felt different, and that's the only way I could explain them. And she was just going to give me more pethidine. I was like, something wrong, and she was like, oh, maybe we'll get you some more pethidine if they're worse. And my mum was like, can you just check her? And she was like, oh, do you want to be checked? I was like, if my mum says it, do it. The midwife checked me and I was 10 centimetres, so essentially I fell asleep at about 6 centimetres and woke up about 10. Which I feel quite lucky about. I really needed to sleep, and maybe if I hadn't been so tired I probably wouldn't have fallen asleep, and I was also full of drugs. I do feel like it might have gone differently otherwise. So I fell asleep, I woke up at 10 centimetres, excuse me. So we started pushing. I tried on my back, on my side, they got me on a birthing ball for a bit. Maybe that was while I was in labour, I don't know. For the most part I was leaned over the back of the bed because that's where I was most comfortable. A couple of times we did move because of his heart rate, just more so not being able to track it than it actually having a problem. They did put a tracking thing on his head a couple of times, but I kept kind of accidentally ripping it out because I'm a fidget and I'm clumsy. So I pushed and I pushed, and I remember pushing and it feeling like a long time, and me just being like, can you see his head yet? Because I suppose I don't know how long it takes. I knew it took like most women under an hour to get their baby out once they started pushing. I'd watched a lot of One Born every minute, but obviously that sped up a hell of a lot. So I started pushing, and I'm not saying that I was in between each push asking, but like I'd probably been pushing for maybe like 15-20 minutes, and I was like, can you even see her head at this point? Should you be able to see something? She was like, no, I can't see anything. No, keep pushing. So I kept pushing. I kept pushing and I kept pushing, and she felt around and he hadn't moved. So I pushed for an hour, and at an hour they have to get a doctor in. So the doctor came in and examined me, and he said legally you can push for 3 hours before we have to intervene. I'm going to let you push for another hour and then I'll come back and check. So I pushed for another hour, and after the hour the baby had not moved, and he'd said, you know, you can push for 3 hours legally, I'll leave you for another hour, but after that we'll have to start considering intervene. You can push for 3, but I just don't think there's any point. So he'd already said this, so I was pushing hard because I did not want them to intervene. I just wanted to get this baby out of me. Another hour passed, so 2 hours, and Rowan still hadn't moved at all. And he was like, so we're gonna do an epidural, and I was like, no. I was like, no, I don't really know what I was like. I wanted to be no, but I don't think that's what happened. I think I was like, So I was like, I don't want one. He was like, well, we're gonna try forceps, and if forceps don't work, we're allowed to pull 3 times on forceps, and if he hasn't moved then we'll have to do a C-section. I was like, I don't want an epidural. He was like, well, if we do the forceps and it doesn't work, we want to be able to just go straight into a C-section without having to do the epidural in between. I was like, can we skip the forceps and put me to sleep and just take him out? But I don't think those words were coming out of my mouth. That's what I was trying to say. I'm pretty sure I was just going, no, put me to sleep. And he was like, we need you to push for forceps so you can't be put to sleep. And I was like, no, just skip those. But I just don't think it was coming out coherently at all. So I had to sign some forms, and I was off my boobies, on drugs, and I didn't really know what I was signing, and I just don't think that was even my signature. At this point they'd put a drip in my hand, and it had already been moved twice, because my veins collapsed. I don't have very good veins. So I was trying to write with all this stuff around my arm where they just kept trying to put drips in, and that sounds like really pathetic, but at this point it was in here, so it was really hard to grip a pen without like rupturing the vein and then them having to move my cannula again. I probably could have held the pen better, but they would have had to move my drips again, so yeah. They took me away. I had to choose a birthing partner because you can only have one for a C-section, and they would only let one in for the forceps as well because they were doing that in a theatre operating room type thing. So I chose Dave. It was hard because I wanted Dave to be there for the baby, but honestly I wanted my mum there for me. I wanted my mum, but I wanted him to see his baby. So that was a hard choice, but it was one that we'd thought about beforehand. I've got to try not to cry. You see it on, like, if you've watched a lot of these things or One Born, sometimes they take their husbands in with them to have their epidural done. They made Dave wait outside and I was on my own getting my epidural done. Because I was already in full-on labour, while they're trying to insert the epidural, I'm bearing down, because when you contract, when you're in full labour, your body won't let you not push. Your body says, I'm going to push this baby out. So they sat me on the side of the bed. You have to try and bend as far forward as you can, which is really difficult with a giant bump in the way. But so then they would insert the needle, and I don't want to put anyone off, but I got a shooting pain down my right leg every time they did it. And she said, you know, if you feel any pain or anything, obviously it's going to hurt a little bit, but if you feel anything, you know, you're worried about, I was like, there's a pain shooting down my leg. She was like, right, stop. They'd try again, same thing again. It went on a couple of times and they were like, right, okay, we're going to have to scan your back. And I think they did like an ultrasound or something similar on my back. The part that they insert it into isn't central on my back apparently, because I have to be awkward. Don't know why my body's so broken. So that's why they were having difficulty getting my epidural in. So they did the scan, they located it, they put me in a spinal instead of an epidural in the end. If you don't know the difference, an epidural is something that you can top up, they like leave it in. The spinal's like a one-shot injection. I don't know what difference it makes for them, other than that they can top it up. But they were trying the epidural, they did the scan, and then they put a spinal in. So then they pulled Dave back into the room, and when he came into the room he was looking pretty pale. Apparently it'd been over half an hour, maybe 45 minutes of this trauma of trying to get this in. I again lost complete track of time. So he was pretty scared that it'd been so long. I suppose he probably thought there was something wrong with one of our heart rates and something had gone wrong, I don't know, because no one really told him until they brought him in. But it hadn't, and they'd got my epidural in and they were lying me on the bed, and I remember like we were hooked up to loads of machines so they could monitor us. I have this, I really don't like things being tight around my throat. It really makes me anxious, and all these wires were trailing on my throat, and Dave came in and I'm completely tired, fucked. I'd been pushing for 2 hours. I was, at this point, was probably my least coherent because I was so tired from pushing. So tired. And obviously I hadn't slept, and obviously I was full of pethidine. I just remember being like this, and I'd been like that for a while because he'd prepped it up, and I was like, and Dave was like, oh yeah, can you move those wires from her neck because she really doesn't cope well with that. And I couldn't even talk, I was just like, probably just because I was a bit anxious with having those on my neck. But so then we tried forceps, and he was like, I'm gonna pull, you're gonna have to push really hard, and I was like, but I can't feel anything because I'm numb from my boobs down. So we did it 3 times. They said I pushed really well. I don't know how you're supposed to push when you can't feel pushing. Like, they were like, oh, push. And I was like, am I pushing? I don't know. Apparently I was. They pulled really hard, and nothing happened again. They pulled 3 times, they're allowed to pull, and then they have to stop. He didn't move, not even like a little bit. He just didn't move, that kiddo. So obviously we had a C-section, but my story doesn't just end here. At this point it was 24 minutes past 8 he was born. they tried showing me him over the thing. I couldn't really see because I'm a short arse. While they sewed me up, Dave held him. Then they took us to recovery, where I finally held my baby after 10, maybe 15 minutes. And I held him. I should probably say he was born on the 24th of July. It was a hot summer. It was really hot. When they came around to do my checks, there was an issue with my pulse and an issue with my temperature, and they took him back off me after about 5 minutes and gave him to Dave because I was too hot, and obviously he was in his blankets and everything, and he was going to bring my temperature up, and they couldn't let me out of recovery until they got my temperature and my pulse down. The temperature thing can be an indicator of sepsis, so they had to take a blood test. My veins at this point were shot to shit from all the stuff they'd been putting in, and they collapsed and they're not very good. So we had to wait for a doctor because the midwife couldn't get any blood to come and take my blood, but they were all really busy, which I totally get. We had absolutely no signal in the recovery room, and my mum at this point is still waiting. We finally got our recovery. It was probably 11 o'clock at night, maybe after 11, and bear in mind he was born at 24 minutes past 8, and my epidural had taken a long time, and they'd done a forceps delivery and everything else. So God knows what time I left my mum, but she had been waiting for hours in a corridor and no one told her anything, and I'm pretty sure that she thought one of us was dead because it was a long time. And they wheeled us past my mum. I was allowed to hold Rowan again while they wheeled me onto a ward, and it was after visiting hours because visiting hours are 9 till 9, so she couldn't come up. So the most she saw of me and Rowan was him on my chest for about a minute while they wheeled me through a corridor, although she did manage to take a lovely photo. We were wheeled up to the ward, Mum went home, it was late, and they came back a little bit later and they were like, your white blood cell count is high, and that's kind of, I believe that means I had sepsis. They never said you have sepsis, but from research I've done, when you have an infection, if your body's blood cells spike, it's sepsis. That's what I understand, but I could be wrong. So they started giving me intravenous antibiotics through my cannula, which kept rupturing, and then they put it here in my arm and they were like, don't bend your arm because if that vein goes we don't have another good vein. And I was like, okay. They also had to take Rowan for antibiotics as well as a precaution. He wasn't showing any signs of anything, but because I was being treated they had to treat him as a precautionary thing. So he had a little cannula in, which was kind of heartbreaking. The next morning my hands were at least double in size. So that kind of few minutes in recovery and the length of time that they wheeled me from recovery to the ward where I had him in the bed with me was the most that I held Rowan for the first 4 days of his life. I just aren't. I couldn't bend his arm because I'd been told not to. I couldn't move my hands. How do you pick a baby up with big? I wish I had a photo of it. I was like a walking bruise because they had to continuously take my blood to monitor the white blood cell count in it. My veins are shit, and I was covered, and I mean covered in bruises to the point where they were looking at my feet to take blood from my feet. 4 days we were there for. For most of it we had a side room, which meant that Dave could stay over, which was really good because he was having to do everything for Rowan because I couldn't get out of bed on my own. It was a lot easier when we got home because my bed's lower and I'm very short. And the hospital beds do lower, but not enough for my short ass. One day, I think it was the second or third, I think it was the third day, they put me on a ward with about 6 other women, which meant that your husband had to go home after visiting hours. What happened that night was that every time Rowan needed anything, and he was feeding every 2 hours, I had to buzz a midwife to come and do it. They weren't impressed because they were busy, and I was like, when you tried to move me to this ward, I did explain to you that, like, can't do this. And like, I'm not just being some fanny who makes excuses, because that's not who I am. And I would show them and they'd be like, oh yeah, you can't do anything in that state. And they were like, why are you here? Why aren't you sat on the side ward with your husband so that he can help? And I was like, they put me here. But I couldn't hold a bottle because I couldn't bend my fingers. So I couldn't get out of bed on my own. I couldn't pick him up. I couldn't do anything. And that night was really hot and he cried a lot that night. I had to listen to him cry and get other people to comfort my baby for me while he cried, and it was really difficult emotionally. The day they moved me to that ward, I cried and discovered that crying after a C-section is very painful, because I'm supposed to be everything to that baby and I was nothing. After that, so we went home. It sounds like the end of a labour story, doesn't it? I ripped my C-section open twice. When I say I'm stubborn and that I'm not some person who just lays back and goes, I'm ill, everyone else do stuff for me, I am not that person. I was discharged by the community midwife, which meant that I didn't have to go in for checkups anymore. I was like, that means I'm okay then. So that was it. I was doing everything and I ripped my C-section open. And then it got infected, and then it ripped open some more, and it took me at least 3 months to completely close the scar, at least, and it's still fucked up and sore. And he's like 9 months old. It's okay now, it's like completely closed, but it's still sore, and I have a completely numb patch on my stomach. No one told me that happens. Yeah, I messed myself up by trying too hard to do too much. But I think emotionally I was really fucked up from my time in the hospital, which the midwives were great, but I can't stress enough how much, if I could have done more, I would have. And I think that's part of the problem, because when I could, I did, and that's what fucked me up. But that's how my labour went. I feel guilty because I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I always feel like maybe I should have pushed harder, tried harder. I don't think I could have pushed harder. There was one point where I was pushing and a doctor was literally pulling and he didn't move. But I still feel like I didn't do enough. And I'll always feel like I didn't do enough. And I'll always feel like I lost so much. I didn't give him his first feed, which was actually pre-planned, but I was like, oh Dave, you bond with him, have his first feed. But I still wanted to do, you know, his first nappy. I wanted to dress him for the first time. I wanted to give him his first bath. But when we got home, we didn't have a baby bath, and we had this bath support in the bath, and I couldn't lean over, so I couldn't do that. I didn't just miss his first feed, I missed like his first 20 plus feeds. Even after that, when I was feeding him, I couldn't physically wind him because I couldn't hold him in a position that wasn't really painful, that was successful to wind a baby. I missed all that stuff. So anyway, lovely uplifting tale for you. That is how my darling son Rowan was born.